If you happen to click on this video and you are not familiar with the channel, I am a huge fan of the show Vikings. So today I wanted to check out this video that was on my homepage, what Vikings actually gets right about history. Hello everybody and welcome back to another video. If you are new here, my name is Kyle. I am your guy with many YouTube channels. Guys, please go show the creator for this video in the pinned comment description down below. I would love to have you guys support that. Let's get started.
Most of us fairly assume that television shows are not historically accurate. Real life almost never unfolds like a well-crafted TV drama. However, that's not always the case when it comes to the hit series Vikings.
Now, I would have assumed that this would have been a little bit more accurate to history because back when the show actually started coming out, a lot more producers were, I guess you could say, more passionate and caring about their projects, and it wasn't like, obviously they're for profit, but you get my point. There was actual, like, vision with this type of stuff.
We're here to talk about what the show has gotten right. Ragnar Lothbrok may not have been a real person. It's hard to tell if someone really lived or not when the stories in question took place over 1,000 years ago. What we do know, however, is that Ragnar features in a very real Icelandic saga. Despite questions about his realness, Ragnar shows up in multiple medieval sources.
Really? I thought that Ragnar was actually a person. I thought there was actually a king that they were supposed to talk about. And of course, it's important to note, I'm aware that all of this could be fake because it is so long ago. But I thought that Ragnar was always a person that was well known throughout history. I just assumed it, I guess.
Exogrammaticus Justa Danorum, published around 1185 AD, confidently states that Ragnar was a 9th century Danish king who went head-to-head with Charlemagne. This account says that Ragnar was eventually captured by King Aella of Northumbria and thrown into a pit full of venomous snakes.
Oh, I see. I assumed that would be a little bit like his story had a little bit of accuracy to it, because I love the way that they handled the story afterwards too. They killed him off so early, so they were probably being accurate to it.
He also pops up in the 12th century Icelandic works Krakumal and Hatalakil from the now Scottish Orkney Islands. The literary Ragnar wasn't done just yet. In the 13th century, readers paging through the manuscript of the Volsunga Saga, an Icelandic epic, would also likely find the saga of Ragnar Lodbrok.
Now, I'm not familiar with any of those, to be honest with you, and I hope this entire video doesn't continue on naming a bunch of things that I'm not too sure about.
According to the introduction, the closest we can get to a maybe real person is a Viking leader named Reginheri, who is referenced in a Frankish chronicle. According to contemporary sources, Reginheri sacked Paris in 845 AD. The earliest anyone can connect the names Ragnar or Lothbrok in any source is much.
Now, I want to know how much thought was put into these types of things when you're actually making the show, because obviously you would like to be historically accurate. It must have taken somebody like that actually knew about like this offhand, studied it in their own kind of time,
later
right?
In the 11th century. Vikings obviously plays fast and loose with some aspects of history, especially the timeline. For example, there's no evidence that Ragnar Lothbrok was a real person who took part in the 8th century raid on England's famous and treasured Lindisfarne Abbey.
Now, it's a lot easier, obviously, to start pointing back to a bunch of places that actually exist. And I don't know how, but they're able to, like, date things back, of course, right? I'm not that intelligent, or it's not my expertise, I should say. Obviously, we can start building stuff from this and drawing conclusions, but it's a little difficult with specific people.
Admittedly, eyewitness accounts from people who were actually there haven't surfaced, so there's some wiggle room as to who exactly was on site causing mayhem. The first recorded account of the raid comes from the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, which was assembled in the late 9th century from earlier sources.
Interesting. I didn't know that the raids were real, too. I thought they were just kind of writing like, oh, Vikings go raiding, that's just what Vikings do, but I didn't know they were like actually diving in specifically to like King Aelle.
We do know that the island of Lindisfarne really was attacked by Scandinavian raiders in the year 793. Chroniclers tend to characterize that year as one doomed from the start, beginning with ominous portents like whirlwinds, widespread famine, and fire-breathing dragons spotted cruising through the air.
Oh, wow. All right. That one's a little bit tough, right?
Then, in June, the chroniclers wrote, heathen men came and miserably destroyed God's church on Lindisfarne with plunder and slaughter.
Now, something like that's obviously a lot easier to believe, right? Because that's just what Vikings ended up doing. They wanted their gold. They were killing people. They want to go Valhalla.
Lagerther, the shield maiden featured throughout Vikings, is a fearsome warrior. Detractors might allege that we're just overlaying modern feminist sensibilities on what was surely another patriarchal culture.
That's a little bit of a tough one to talk about women in battle, which, by the way, if you happen to be watching this video, YouTube, I'm very, very grateful to be on this platform, and I do not believe that there are any greater warriors than a nice woman in battle, okay? It's just difficult as somebody with combat experience, and you kind of really, really feel the difference. Somebody who, if Lagertha was a real person, somebody who, like, really was that good, survived all of the different battles, you know, it's extremely, extremely easy to believe.
Norse women never went into battle, right? One extraordinary grave proves that they did. First excavated in the 1880s in Birka, Sweden, this burial was packed full of evidence showing that the occupant must have been a warrior. They were interred with a sword, a spear, an axe, arrows, a knife, 2 shields, and 2 horses. The original archaeologists assumed that the occupant was male. However, DNA evidence later proved that the individual was female.
Isn't that crazy? That we dig up these types of things and then actually, I don't even know how you would get into the DNA that could figure out that you're female. Like, what do you take DNA from? I don't know if I'm outing myself to just be an idiot here. I don't really understand it that well.
Literary sources also indicate that the Norse wouldn't have been shocked by the sight of a female warrior. According to the Ancient History Encyclopedia, literate Vikings could have listed multiple examples of women going into battle. These include Lagertha, a maiden warrior mentioned in the Gesta Danorum or History of the Danes.
It always makes me think, you murdered the most famous shield maiden in the world.
Vikings and Norse traders were impressively well-traveled. Runes tell us they made it all the way to Hagia Sophia in Constantinople, now Istanbul, Turkey.
And I like that the Vikings actually dove into that in the actual parts, and I was so stupid because I didn't realize after that very, very long journey with Ube that it was America that they got to.
Also know that they traveled far afield to Iceland, Greenland, and if the stories of Leif Erikson are true, all the way to the eastern coast of Canada. Also, a 6th century metal sculpture, which researchers have identified as a Buddha figure, was found in a Norse grave in Helgo, Sweden.
They just took it. Man, it's an interesting culture, that's for sure.
Research shows that the statue would have been made in India, meaning that Vikings at least had contact with traders who had been there. The point is that the society of the Norse could be quite diverse. A large genetic study of human remains from 2400 BC to 1600 AD shows that Vikings often mixed with a wide variety of ethnic groups. In fact, the Norse of the Viking age only passed down somewhere around 15 to 30% of their genetic markers to
to be honest with you, I believe that. I believe that. Just with the kind of way they are, what they do, how they go about life. It's Viking culture's always been very fascinating to me, to be honest.
Modern Scandinavians. This indicates a continued disregard for concepts like tribes or ethnic groups.
And I look forward to getting to know your sons and introducing mine.
Though he almost certainly wasn't the brother of Ragnar Lothbrok, Rollo was a real Viking warrior and leader who took part in the siege of Paris in the years 885 to 886.
So, they're talking about being this like great warrior. I like what they did, honestly. Made him a brother of Ragnar because we don't know exactly if Ragnar was a real guy. That would make him a really interesting warrior, and it would explain how he ended up actually going to Paris.
In most sources, he's known as Rollo of Normandy, having founded that duchy. He was born in what's now Norway and then participated in many raids, which eventually landed him in France sometime in the 10th century. He besieged Paris again and was so successful in that venture that French King Charles III resorted to a treaty around the year 911 to get Rollo to stop. The treaty ended the siege and gave Rollo control of Normandy, where he settled.
Wow, eh? So that's actually supposedly a true story. So is Rollo and Lagertha the only characters? Like, I know we've heard people about Ragnar throughout history talk about Ragnar, but Rollo and Lagertha were the only like actual characters supposedly that were real back then?
Sources go on to say that Rollo and his men behaved themselves decently enough, with Rollo even reportedly getting baptized a Christian. Then again, much of Rollo's story has been embellished over the years. We'll never know for sure.
Yeah, my sister always put it pretty well, where it kind of feels like a whole game of telephone when we're talking like that far back in history, so it's understandable.
Halls were integral to Viking culture, as they were centers of community life where the local lord would conduct business, throw parties, and show off for visitors. Without the glory of a local mead hall, something truly special would have been missing both from the show and from actual Norse life.
Yeah, that's another thing that's very easy to believe in. It's easy to pass down Viking culture, plus you could just like go there, I guess. You could figure it out.
Halls tended to have a few common features. They were usually a large building with a single room placed in a central location on a large farm. Halls also tended to be unusually tall and with little interior posts blocking the action. Excavations make it pretty clear that these weren't everyday places. Archaeologists rarely find workaday items like cooking utensils in halls, for instance.
How did they get their food? How did they get their food? So the Viking rings were real, eh?
Instead, they might uncover precious objects that would have belonged to high-ranking folk or religious items like amulets or statues.
Now, I wonder if the Viking rings were actually real, because they just showed that, like, oh, you swear on your armband when they were doing throughout the show.
We have clear evidence that the Norse used makeup, though the ingredients in their cosmetics were different from the ones on a modern makeup artist's table.
You always find it funny how you had, like, such a really, I guess, like masculine, tough culture, yet a bunch of them were wearing makeup.
Materials aside, the looks sported by actors on the show aren't too different from what Norse folk were wearing during the 10th century. One Arab visitor, Ibrahim al-Tarushi, visited the Swedish town of Hedeby around 950. He wrote, "There is also an artificial makeup for the eyes. When they use it, beauty never fades. On the contrary, increases in men and women as well."
So that I guess that looked good back in the day. I would understand having makeup on to like distinguish between your warriors, but like what Bjorn had with like the white on his face, if they all did that kind of makes sense. But just to walk around like Floki putting on his makeup every day, I always found that a little strange.
Vikings probably used mineral-based coal. Based on Al-Tartushi's accounts, the Norse also used a semi-permanent indelible cosmetic that may have been eye drops dosed with atropine, a toxic substance found in plants like belladonna. Atropine drops would have caused prolonged eye dilation, which other cultures have found attractive.
Huh. Well, I guess I just got my question answered. Let's go rating with my dilated pupils just to...
Vikings portrays a diverse array of cultural traditions. In the show, funerals
and
are
before anybody clips that, I'm talking about, like, you know, the times where like Bjorn went to just go sleep with people, you know what I mean?
exceptionally grand. Though Vikings didn't keep written records, archaeologists have discovered that funeral arrangements centered on either burial or cremation, and often varied based on status. Those lower in society were usually buried in simple, relatively shallow graves, while the higher-ups sometimes got monumental burial mounds, sometimes called barrows.
I mean, like, not too different from today's standards, I guess, depending on your faith.
Some of the biggest steals in Norse society were buried with ships. The Osberg, a 70-foot-long ship uncovered in Norway, was undoubtedly reserved for some seriously big names.
I thought it would have been cool. Now that I'm thinking about it, makes me sad that Ragnar, you know, suffered the way he did. He never actually got a proper burial, but at the end of the day, she was reunited with Lagertha. He ended up actually going to Valhalla because of, like, the message we saw, or the visual that we saw when Lagertha ended up passing away.
Including 2 women. Also, while popular imagination leads you to believe that many of these ships were sent into the sea and then set alight with flaming arrows, most of these craft were apparently buried in the ground. The effort and cost of constructing these finely crafted vessels...
You know what I was just thinking about, too? Like, I can't imagine how long it took, especially in that time, to just build a boat, and then you have to dig a hole big enough to bury a boat, and then all of that time you just bury a boat after all of that.
It would have been too much to simply burn one to ashes, even for the highest Norse chieftain. No one's found reliable physical or literary evidence of such a dramatic tradition. In the show, Ragnar often used an opaque, naturally formed device.
Yeah, I've heard that sunstones were actually real. I just don't know much about them.
Known as a sunstone to navigate the treacherous seas. As it turns out, sunstones might have actually been real. They're mentioned in the Norse sagas, but the writers don't give much detail. Archaeologists did recover a calcite crystal in a 15th century English shipwreck, indicating that this was a tradition that might have been carried from the Vikings into the Tudor era.
Well, there had to have been a way to navigate the sea. There's no way that they could have consistently made it like throughout the sea over to the places that they wanted to go and then returning home without some sort of way to travel. So I am a believer in the sunstones.
A Hungarian team ran computer simulations which indicated that a calcite-based sunstone would have been helpful, though Vikings probably used other navigational techniques like observing whale migrations, looking for familiar landmarks, and following other astronomical phenomena like the stars.
Yeah, but what if you go off course even just a little bit? I guess the stars could make sense, right? You can go in the direction of one of them in the opposite direction. That makes a little sense, actually.
Researchers have tested a sunstone. It was so accurate that the team were able to track the sun within 1% of its actual location. Floki Vilgersson is known as the first Norseman to intentionally sail to Iceland in the 9th century. Beyond that, there's a lot of myth and legend surrounding him.
Unfortunately, that was my least favorite part about the entire show, was Floki taking off and the journey that he had and the conflicts that he had with a bunch of people until he ended up, like, well, dying, as the show presented.
Story forms the basis for the master shipbuilder named Floki shown on Vikings. Iceland may have seemed like a mythical place already to the settling Norse folk. Even today, many see it as a primeval land of ice and fire.
Yeah, how could you not, honestly? I mean, like, with everything that we're taught of about Iceland and Greenland, right? Like, it's made to believe that type of stuff.
With harsh winters and short summers marked by volcanoes occasionally spewing lava and ash across the landscape.
That's another thing that I will never understand about anybody ever, is why in a million years you would be near an active volcano.
First known people to settle this dramatic land, according to the 13th century Book of the Settlements, were led by Nadar the Viking, or sometimes called Nadover, who was blown off course around 830. Gardar the Swede followed some 30 years later, but eventually returned back to Scandinavia.
You know what's sad is I need to rewind just a few seconds there, because I ended up getting happy for Floki and what he saw. It was so cool to see that episode.
Gardar the Swede followed some 30 years later, but eventually returned back to Scandinavia, leaving Floki to establish a more permanent community around 868. According to the legend, he became known as Rafna Floki, or Raven Floki, because he released a series of 3 ravens in order to find land.
That's really sad, because it would have been so cool to dive a little bit more into this, but like there was something that we heard about the show, like not having enough time, or they wanted to wrap it up pretty quickly, because it would have been cool to see like what Floki actually became of himself. Like we did see, but we saw like very little of it.
When the 3rd raven flew off and didn't try to return, Floki followed it to land. After a hard winter, he returned to Norway and complained about the trip, but glowing reviews from his fellow travelers led others to seek out new homesteads in Iceland. The Vikings were pretty fashionable, it appears. Excavations of their graves and other sites reveal troves of jewelry, says the National Museum of Denmark.
Yeah, that's another thing that I wondered about too, like, because there are so many people in the show that like actually look good. Obviously they have makeup on, but you know what I mean? Their hair is done up, their fashion's good in general, their clothes. I wonder if it was actually that good back in the day.
If archaeologists are lucky, they might even uncover intricate textiles, which tend to decay pretty quickly if conditions aren't just right. Between excavations and literary sources,
like, look at that, man. Like, it's actually like something solid. Not that it's like hard to do or anything, but they all ended up looking pretty good.
We know that the Vikings and Norse alike cared about their appearance. We have more concrete information about how male Vikings styled their hair than we do about women's fashion.
Dude, I always thought it would have been like super cool to get like a nice Viking cut, but I'm a short 5'7" guy. I'm not exactly the most built. I don't think it would look too great on me.
Typically wore beards and kept their hair relatively long. Sometimes they even colored or bleached their hair with compounds like lye, gathered from the ashes of a fire. Some were well known for their hair, as evidenced by names of figures like Harold Fairhair and Sweyn Forkbeard.
Oh my god, I've never even thought about that with King Harold. I've never even like contributed to that. And the guy had a nice set of hair on him.
The National Museum of Denmark notes that the reverse mullet was one of the more popular male styles. This Danish fashion, as some Anglo-Saxon writers called it, dictated that men keep the hair on the top of their head long, while closely cropping the hair at the back, similar to what Ragnar and others sport on Vikings.
Yeah, I think it looks kind of cool, man, to be honest with you. Again, I'm just somebody who finds the entirety of Viking culture very, very interesting and fascinating.
Compared to women from other societies of the time, Viking women had much more freedom. Like the character of Lagertha, they ran their own affairs, from conducting business on their own to initiating divorces when a relationship failed.
Oh yeah, they seem to be completely free people. They're you could argue like they're some of the most free people out there.
While there were Viking warrior women,
but then again, now that I think about it, like girls are pretty free nowadays. They probably have more power upon people than Yeah, pretty well anybody in society, I guess, eh?
Most Norse lived in a gendered world. Women were expected to govern the household, acting as hosts, cooks, storytellers, and business owners. They managed whatever the family produced, like livestock or textiles, and took charge of the family's financial well-being.
And that's what I liked about this show too, is it really showed that part. And I always found it like something that I always point to in Vikings is I like the battle of the different faiths coming together and having those conversations. I like that we saw people like Lagertha, and then we have characters like Judith who weren't exactly free until King Egbert. I find it fascinating that it showed both sides of that.
Women were also tasked with raising children, which is nothing to dismiss. Proper household management was vital, especially during the intense Scandinavian winters and on frontiers like Iceland. Women weren't necessarily restricted to the homestead. For instance, they could act as seeresses, who played an important religious role in pre-Christian Norse society.
Long story short, they could pretty well just do whatever they want.
Queens and other nobles enjoyed even greater status, as indicated by the women found in burial sites around Norway. Check out one of our newest videos.
I thought that was good. We learned a little bit, to be honest with you, and I always love talking about one of my favorite shows of all time. Again, Vikings is my second favorite show in the entire history of everything that I watched. So if you're interested, actually, we did make a tier list video, and I ranked every single show that I've watched throughout my life, and you can check it out right here. I'd love to have you over there. Thanks for watching, everybody. Take care, guys.